We are talking Werewolves, directed by Stephen C. Miller. And this one stars Frank Grillo, Katrina Law and Lou Diamond Phillips. And it's been described as The Purge with werewolves. And that description is actually quite apt. Now, I think the story has an interesting central idea. A year ago, from the beginning of the movie, there was a supermoon that unexpectedly turned 1 billion people, so around about an eighth of the population of Earth, into werewolves over the course of this supermoon that particular night. And many people died. Obviously, everyone was kind of caught unawares. And now there is another supermoon 1 year or so later. So everyone is now fearing that once again this supermoon will turn people into werewolves. So how it works is you get sort of touched by the moonlight essentially, and you then turn into a werewolf almost immediately. And there is a group of scientists, one of which is Frank Grillo's character, and they are trying to develop a way to stop this. They've developed like a spray that will almost kind of mask the moonlight. So they're kind of testing it on a couple of volunteers who are going to turn into werewolves. At the same time, you've got Frank Grillo's sister-in-law and his niece who are holed up in a kind of fortified house getting ready along with everyone else to try and defend their property from any rampaging werewolves that might be in the area. As the movie progresses, the experiments in this lab go wrong. Frank Grillo and Katrina are on the run, and werewolves do indeed attack the sister-in-law of Frank Grillo's character, including a gun-toting crazy neighbour who is now turned into a werewolf. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. What do I think works in this movie's favour? Now, I think that there's a phrase here that I think it perfectly encapsulates this movie. Do you like dumb fun? Because if the answer is yes, then there is a lot to enjoy with this movie. It is a mixture of horror and action with a pulse-pounding pace. You know, there is werewolf action, there's gunplay, there's explosions, there's shootouts. Once the action starts, it never really stops. And I do think the central idea is strong here, having this kind of this global effect, and no one really knows why or anything like that. I think it's a good premise. So it's essentially the werewolf apocalypse, really. So that I kind of quite liked. And if you were a fan of the Purge films, particularly the ones that actually starred Frank Grillo, there are sequences within this movie that definitely will kind of remind you of those movies. I mean, we don't just have werewolves out. We've got kind of basically gun-toting kind of like vigilantes who want to go and kill werewolves. We've got kind of weird sort of cultists out there. So yeah, it is very much kind of in the vein of the Purge in that respect. I think Frank Grillo is bordering on a touch overexposed at this point, but nonetheless I do find him very watchable, and he makes for a good leading man. And I think obviously the Purge movies were really the movies that put him on the map, and I think it's kind of a return to those, even though this isn't officially a Purge movie. It's very much in the mould of the movies that kind of made him somewhat of a more famous actor. Now, a good attempt here was to have a lot of the werewolves, not all, but a lot of the werewolves done practically. So we get a good amount, and some of them are kind of wearing the clothes that they were when they were a human, which kind of gives you a way of sort of telling them apart. We've got like a kind of our main bad guy, one of this gun-toting kind of like neighbour. You know, he's got kind of war paint on, which then kind of like translates to him as a werewolf, along with like a kind of a bulletproof vest. But we've got, you know, ones with suits. We've got one like a biker one with kind of like biker regalia and stuff like that on him. So there's a few kind of like different sorts of characters here. And the movie suggests that the werewolves aren't just simply feral creatures. They do have a small degree of like problem solving and stuff, which makes them able to kind of somewhat sort of think. For example, we have a sequence where there's an electrified fence and one of the werewolves grabs like just a dead body of one of the victims they killed and kind of holds it against the fence to kind of like short it out and things like that. So, you know, the movie suggests that these werewolves do have at least some level of intelligence and kind of problem solving and things like that, which obviously makes them dangerous because they are not just kind of animals who are randomly just kind of like foraging for food and stuff. They are thinking and to some degree kind of planning. The VFX themselves, I have to say, I don't think they're the best looking werewolves I've ever seen. But they are still quite impressive, and you know, one of the issues I sometimes have with werewolf movies and their practical design is they always have like that sort of growl face, and you know, the technology prevents them from kind of really having much movement in the mouth area. Whilst these ones, we do actually have like animated snarls and the way their kind of mouths open and close, they actually look a little bit more, there's a bit more life to them because they have taken the time to make these kind of creatures emote a little bit more and actually have expressions to a degree at least. So again, it's one of the bugbears I've always had with kind of werewolf movies. You've always got that kind of perma growl on most of these kind of practically realised kind of suits. There is a degree of CGI when they're kind of transforming and stuff. It's not the best, but like, you have to bear in mind this isn't a kind of a mega budget movie. I think it's good enough really for a movie of this kind of budget to have this kind of level of CGI. There's some kind of fun sort of transformation sequences where we see the kind of the muscles pop and the kind of the bones break and things like that. But it's interesting because it is just literally the moonlight that kind of, you know, it hits you, and then you're basically, even if it hits, like there's one guy that gets like, he's got like a hazmat suit on and his neck's exposed, and that was enough. That was enough to kind of make him turn. So it's really sort of like any sort of moonlight really will just hit you. And that's it, you're kind of transforming, and it doesn't take long. It happens almost instantly, which makes it a very kind of visceral experience, if that makes sense. I mean, I think there was an opportunity here to have more werewolves in kind of certain outfits or something like that. Like the guy in a hazmat suit, he just kind of like rips out of it. It would have been maybe fun to have a little bit more, you know, of the human stuff attached to them to a degree. Again, it would help the kind of telling them apart to a degree. But yeah, it's kind of that, and I mean, there are some little interesting elements here, like the people who have turned on the on the first supermoon, because this movie was originally called Year 2, meaning that obviously the first year had already happened, and this was the second time this was kind of going on, but they changed it because they thought people would get confused and think it was a sequel. But yeah, so the first kind of generation of werewolves and stuff who have got scars and stuff where they've been changed and stuff. You know, again, they're kind of sensing the moon and things, and they're sensing the change, and I think it's quite interesting. It has this little flashes of lore that it kind of gives you, and then think, well, do you know what? That's kind of an interesting sort of like take on this kind of mythology and stuff. And overall, the pace of the movie is very kind of quick, and it's very exciting. There's lots of set pieces, so I think you'll be entertained. You won't be bored in this movie. So let's talk about what doesn't work, and let's just kind of go back to my opening statement really. This is dumb fun. This is the main problem I think with this movie, is that I think the idea was a great idea. This kind of the moonlight hit and then, you know, an eighth of the population turned into werewolves. What a fun concept. But I think the execution of the movie that we've got has missed its opportunities. I wouldn't say it's wasted the idea, but I do think it hasn't taken the best advantage of what could have been told. So, without giving any spoilers here, let me give you some of the idea of what I mean. Now, let's talk about werewolf lore. We don't really know what these werewolves are either, will stop them. Like, nothing is really ever kind of brought up, like silver, for example. Silver bullets, never really mentioned. So, you know, is that like the kill, is that going to kill them straight away, or is it just going to be like whatever? Because these werewolves seem to be able to be killed with conventional methods, just a lot of it. So does that mean like a silver bullet through the heart won't, you know, is just as effective as any other type of bullet? It's never really addressed. And they kind of even sort of deliberately skip over some questions. Like they say, well, why has a supermoon never done this before the first time? They just, we don't know. Okay, fine. So the mythology here is a little bit sort of questionable. Like, for example, again, the moonlight changes you into a werewolf, but when the sun comes out, you change back. So by that meaning, does it suggest that you have to be, once you're like inside a building, would that then turn you back into a human? Because it doesn't seem to. So if you're outside, you get hit by the moonlight, you turn into a werewolf, and you go into a building, the moonlight's no longer with you, but you're still staying as a werewolf. But when the sunlight comes out, that will turn you back. So I just don't know if the mythology is particularly kind of thought out, if that makes sense. It's an interesting idea, and I just don't think it's been sort of like thought about quite as much as maybe it should have been. And like I said, there's some stuff they just don't address. Like another thing is like, because this is the second year, we already have this first year where people were caught unawares. Now, to me, that would have been an interesting film to have because people were caught unawares. But here, people have the time to prepare. So why is it there are people outside that are turning into werewolves? It's never really addressed. Now, again, this is something that could have been addressed. We could have had people like out there who are wanting to become werewolves. They are sort of like, I don't know, just sort of like, you know, they believe it's their destiny or whatever. But it's never really addressed. We see people kind of like rushed inside, and people are put into kind of quarantines and then underground and stuff. Okay, so you're preparing for this supermoon, but then why are there still werewolves out there? Why are there still people that have got turned when we never really see that? I think there should have been some type of scenes where, you know, we have people that are deliberately wanting to turn or something. I mean, I guess you'd have a few people that get caught out for whatever reason, but, you know, it's said to be quite sort of like everywhere. So there's that. I mean, there's also the elements that are introduced, like these like human characters that Frank Grillo and the other scientists kind of run into. And there's like a bunch of like cyberpunk people with like gas masks and like goggles and stuff. What are you doing? I mean, who are these people? And like, why are they dressed like, you know, emo kids hanging around inside this? And it's just like, okay. And then they just run into them and then we never see them again. What was the point? What was the point? And again, we have these kind of group of vigilantes and stuff, and we see them, but we don't know who they are, what their reasons are. It's just kind of like brushed over. So I feel this movie just kind of just doesn't do the work in building this mythology. It just kind of like, wow, whatever, and just kind of brushes through it. Now, so I think you can do it sometimes with some things, but this movie just does it with so lot. And the other thing I would say, really, and it's similar, to be honest, is the movie really has two storylines, two plot lines. You've got Frank Grillo and Katrina Law's characters going through the streets, trying to escape this kind of lab, where it's all gone wrong, and then trying to get to Frank Grillo's sister-in-law's house, going through the streets, fighting werewolves, etc. And then you've also got Frank Grillo's sister, or sister-in-law, sorry, defending her house against werewolves and protecting their little niece. But that storyline with a protecting the house, I think is quite weak, because it seems silly. Like, so this sister-in-law she's not armoured up. She's got like a little crop top on, you know, and then she's got like, Frank Grillo sets up all these traps and things. She's got all these monitors. Is she sitting watching the monitors? No, she's sitting on the sofa with her daughter. I'm thinking, if this was like this a bigger deal, you would be glued to these monitors to see what is going on. You wouldn't be just like letting these werewolves run roughshod, and they're gonna like take these werewolves like take down the cameras, and she doesn't even notice because she's not even looking at these cameras. You'd be glued to them, and like for all this prep, Why isn't there like a little safe room or something in the house, or something like that, or a, you know, some type of like something in the floor where they can hide behind them? And there's a lot of effort in putting electric fences up and things like this, but like, why wouldn't there be like some type of cellar or underground compartment where you can kind of hide in and be, you know, just, again, it's silly. And then she's just running around, she's like just running around, seemingly leaving her daughter just out in the front room, and she hasn't loaded her gun. I think that whole sequence, that whole storyline, to me was extremely weak. You know, and again, the levels of intelligence of these werewolves, because they're not portrayed to be purely like animal instincts. They are appearing to have some type of very rudimentary reasoning skills and problem solving, but nothing's really addressed with it. Again, it just seems like a little bit of a waste of an opportunity. So I think this movie is a lot of fun. It's got a lot of great set pieces. Frank Grillo is watchable. The werewolf effects, I think, are pretty good. They kind of look more like crocodiles in some sequences, I would say, hairy crocodiles, but, you know, whatever. But it just seems like it just hasn't taken advantage of such a great premise, and has ultimately gone for a very sort of like unremarkable storytelling, if that makes sense. It's still worth watching. I enjoyed it, and yeah, it's kind of like, as I say, it's somewhat of a dumb fun movie, but this could have been so much more interesting had they sort of like put a little bit more attention to detail on it. So as it stands though, I will say it's a 6 out of 10. At least it's an original idea to a degree, and I did like the presentation and the fun aspect of it. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.